Hi there, everyone. This is Darren from SimNation. Just wanted to bring everybody up to speed on where we are with SNCFL, which of course is SimNation's Draft Day Sports College Football 2024 League. We adopted 2024 as soon as it came out. It's producing some interesting dynamic within the league. So let's just dive in real quick. So top 25 wise, Stewart is at number one. Good for him. Previously, it had been Shark with Georgia at number two. Maryland, of course, started the season as the number one team. All those teams are largely undefeated. Let's just actually maybe go here because one of the things I hate about that top 25 is it doesn't really tell you the record. So we have a lot of undefeated teams still, and that's not too shocking with where we are in the season because some of the teams haven't ran into each other yet. Louisiana Monroe, which is Skeletor, it's great to see him back. He's 7-0. He's really dominating the SEC at this point. Frankie has the number five and number six teams. Iowa is just a menace so far this season with their running game. Oklahoma State lost McDougal, but they're still doing really well. Number seven is Washington State, which is one of my two teams. And then Stewart has the number eight team in Western Michigan. Shark has the number nine team in Iowa State. You have Sample with the number 10 team with Florida State. So he's doing really well there. He's had a lot of injury issues, and I'm a little bit shocked that he's still doing as well as he's doing because traditionally, when Asa Garcia goes down, he has that tendency to see a little bit of a tank. Bama, can't say enough about Bama and Virginia Tech. He's come into the league, he's done a really good job with guiding Virginia Tech back to the promised land. A little shocked to see Gary at number 13. I mean, in fairness, Gary lost his first game, and the CPU's just not been very nice to him. Great to see Kevin with his Rutgers team at number 14. I'm not looking forward to playing them at any point because Kevin's definitely got them on a good path. Tom has Auburn back. It's great to see he lost his first game, but then he's bounced back with six straight wins. That's something that, um, if you follow Auburn, there used to be Matt. Matt dominated with Auburn for a long time, and it's great to see that Tom is following in Matt's footsteps and really driving them. Michigan's had a pretty up and down season. Stewart probably is a little bit pissed off about the whole Jim Harbaugh thing, but Michigan hasn't been as good as probably they should be. It's really good to see Skelter with Buffalo. Um, it's just great to see someone who may be able to compete against Stewart with Western Michigan, and we really haven't seen that in a while. So he's doing a fantastic job there. We have Soa at number 23, and then at number 24, if I remember correctly, this is Brian. Brian's doing a pretty good job with USC, despite some issues there. Um, and then we'll talk about a couple other teams here in a second. If we look at the standings, it's really too early to call any race, right? So Florida State is still probably who I would expect to win uh, the Atlantic. Syracuse, this is DP, but in fairness to DP, he hasn't been coaching them until recently because he had to get the new version of the game. Clemson is kind of hit or miss, and that's spoof. So he'll want to get them a little bit. He's had some quarterback issues, and I think that hasn't helped. But of course, he plays DP this week. Wake Forest versus Florida State. This will largely determine likely who may win the Atlantic. Of course, Boston College is still in there. Um, and then on the flip side, you have really the battle of the top on the coastal, which is going to be Virginia Tech versus Miami. So this is Bama versus Gary, and it'll ultimately kind of determine who's going to win the coastal because I think those are really the two teams that have the best shot. Pittsburgh's in the race, but I don't really see Pittsburgh pulling it out. And of course, you have Stewart, who's uncharacteristically at the bottom. Eric Guerrero has been a good running back for a while. We talked about Asa Garcia. Asa Garcia, when he came into the league, was kind of like Marcus Witten, who everyone thought that he would become probably the top pick in the WWPF draft when he came out. He's just been so injury plagued, it may not happen. It'll be interesting to see how that kind of pans out. Tony Hamilton's, of course, having a great season as a wide receiver, and then you see that Sample's doing his normal good job of recruiting. So is Gary. So it'll be interesting to see how the Atlantic kind of pans out. You have a three-team race really in the Atlantic, and then you have a three-team race in the Coastal. In the AAC, Cable is doing better with UCF. They've been up and down. Of course, DWK would like Cincinnati to maybe be a little bit more consistent because they've also been up and down. And then really, this race is pretty wide open. So any of these three teams can largely take it in the East. In the West, um, I would say it's still pretty wide open. Houston, Tulsa, Navy all can really kind of pull that out. Tulsa, of course, has a pretty good quarterback in Moshe Dumas. So it'll be interesting to see how it works out. And then, of course, Cincinnati and UCF and Houston all really recruiting off the charts. So it'll be interesting to see what happens with the Cincinnati South Florida game. So this is DWK versus CPU to see if you're going to see some separation there. And then, of course, Central Florida, if they can beat Memphis, who is a decent team, they can keep in the race here as well. The Big 12 largely being dominated by both Frankie and Shark. Kansas started really, really hot and has struggled a little bit. BYU not having quite the season they wanted. Of course, Colorado not having the season I wanted. Um, and then you have Steve with Oklahoma, who got shocked a little bit by Colorado. But largely, I think if you look at this race, it's still pretty wide open. But I think that Oklahoma State and Iowa State are going to be the two teams in the conference championship. They're just running away with it at this point. So Iowa State gets Baylor. I don't see Shark losing the Baylor. BYU travels to Colorado. So this will be Starfinder versus me. We'll see. I don't have a good feel for Colorado. I'm dealing with some injuries too. I'm not confident though at all. Kansas versus Oklahoma. I think Steve's going to bounce back at the detriment of Van. Van's having a good season with Kansas, but I don't think I see that. And then, of course, as you can see, is Edward Yang is making everybody forget about McDougal already. And then Zachary Grady's having a great season as well. Frankie did land the number one recruit in the class in Thomas Newcomb. He's a pretty good quarterback, so it'll be interesting to see how that do. And then you can definitely see Frankie's just nailing recruiting right now. Um, I mean, he's already got this is like a Maryland type class. So Frankie is only getting stronger, and it'll be interesting to see how these two teams stack out. In the Big Ten, it's still pretty wide open. You have Maryland, who is right there as per normal, but they have the more brutal part of their schedule coming up where they have to take on Michigan, Ohio State, and then, of course, they'll end the season against Rutgers. Right now, Rutgers is on a pretty good roll. So is Maryland. So Maryland takes on Stewart. This one is always pretty close. Even though Maryland has dominated it, I still think Stewart could win this year. Maryland's not quite the team it's been in the past. Starfinder with Minnesota. Everyone's chasing Iowa at this point. I'm just going to call it now. Outside of Wisconsin, I don't think anyone's going to catch Iowa. And the reason why I think that Wisconsin may have a chance is they got a pretty good coach in Joe Dorman. But if they can't slow Iowa down, it's pretty much over. Of course, I need to look and make sure that they haven't played, and I'm missing that already. No, they play this week, so yeah, That's going to largely determine that. So if there's a team that I think other than Maryland that can trip up Iowa, it's going to be Wisconsin. Rutgers versus Indiana. I mean, Kevin's got Rutgers dialed in. That should be a pretty big win for them. I think that it will be interesting to see how Don does Hill. I think Don isn't having quite the season he wants at Penn State. Um, that's unfortunately become pretty common. But I do think that Penn State could have a really good season this year. Um, well, not a good season, but I do think that they get a good chance of winning this game. I'm just double checking to make sure that Notre Dame is not someone that is not CPU. So yeah, I think Don could win this game. The problem that Don has is he's in the hardest division um, there is in this outside of the Big 12. And then, of course, some of these other games don't matter. Rutgers, as I said, again, Kevin's having a good year. Law's having a good year with Ohio State. Ohio State probably would be better, but again, DP wasn't coaching them for most of the season so far. And then, of course, as you can see, is it's pretty wide open in recruiting so far. Some of the big names haven't signed. Maryland, of course, is going to have a smaller class, but Michigan's doing pretty good as well. Conference USA, we'll just kind of glaze through this one. Um, I think right now UTEP is in the lead here, and it won't shock me too much if they win it. Louisiana Tech could, of course, knock them off path. I think again, when you look at this, it's really between Old Dominion and James Madison. Of course, James Madison in real life is having a pretty good season. So, um, and North Texas is just someone to keep an eye on, but they're having a down year, so I don't expect to see much still. We'll skip over Independence. In the MAC, the MAC is always all roads lead through Western Michigan, and Stewart really hasn't changed any of that. Central Michigan's having a pretty good season, but of course they lost to Western Michigan. The team to keep an eye on is Buffalo. That's Skeltor. There's a good chance that Skeltor's going to be able to guide them towards competing against Stewart for that title. I think Stewart's going to have a little bit more competition than he normally does. Now, the key is Skeltor needs to fend off Kent State so he can be in that game. I don't see anyone catching up with Western Michigan. They're going to win the West easily. Um, but I do think that Buffalo will give them a pretty good game, and I kind of look forward to seeing that. As you can see here is good quarterback, good running back, and then of course Western Michigan is already recruiting at a pretty high level. So it'll be interesting to watch those twos. But this week you have me against Northern Illinois. Central Michigan I think will win that. Bowling Green's just going to get shredded. And really those are the big games this week. In the Mountain West, I think the challenge with the Mountain West is just the teams just keep knocking each other off. So you have a three race here where you have Colorado State, Boise State, Utah State. I do think that more than likely uh, my money would be on Utah State winning this division normally, but they have a harder schedule, so I'm going to go with Colorado State. Boise State used to be Skeltor. If Skeltor was still there, I think that I would pick them, but I think Colorado State's going to win it. Um, Big matchup for Don Lookie. He plays Utah State this week, and hopefully he's able to take them out. On the flip side, Nevada, Texas Christian, and San Diego State are all having really good seasons so far. So it'll be interesting to see how that one pans out. I kind of like Nevada still, but I think San Diego State's a team that people got to keep an eye on because I think that they could easily win that. Um, but it's really a three-team race with those in there. And of course, TCU used to be in the Big 12, but we moved them. So Ruiz is having a really good season. And then, of course, from Nevada, you have the quarterback Belchor and Pace, who are both having good seasons, one being a quarterback, the other one being a wide receiver. And then you see that Boise State is recruiting well again, like they always do. The Pac-12 is an interesting race. Washington State has a game in hand on Stanford, so there's a good chance that Washington State could win out in the North. That wouldn't be too much of a shock. In the South, UCLA is going to win it. They have a two-game advantage on everybody down there. Keep an eye on Arizona. That's Don Lucky. And then, of course, we talked about Brian already. Um, he's ranked number 24. I think that as he gets his feet more and more onto him, he should be able to do some things. This week, Stanford versus USC, that should be a pretty good game. It'll be interesting to see who comes out on top on that one. And then, of course, Cal, if I remember correctly, is Bama, I think. Uh, so that should be a good matchup. This is Van versus Don, and then if I remember correctly, I think Fresno State is Starfinder. So it'll be interesting to see how that pans out. Of course, Washington State is off, so is UCLA. O'Malley's having a great season, and then you have Kim Hawthorne, who's having a really good season too. And then, as you can see, is Stewart's having a great season recruiting with UCLA. He doesn't have any real natural competition out there in the West, so he's able to pretty much run wild. But I know he's beaten like Maryland out for Derek Young, and he's beaten Washington State out a few times too. I think this one is really going to be Tom versus will be a run to see who can get there first, whether it's Tom or Skeltor. Um, now that DP's back at Alabama, there could be a run there, but it's a two horse race here between Louisiana Monroe, which is Skeltor, and then Tom at Auburn. They're both having really good seasons, so I look forward to that. Of course, Tom has a big matchup this week with the other front runner in the East, which is Shark. And Shark is just having a really good season, as you can see, 412 points for 44 against. That's pretty remarkable. So we'll see how this one plays out. If Auburn wins, I think that that's going to put a lot of pressure on Skeltor. You have Soa versus DP. I like DP in that one, and then really no other humans playing. As mentioned again, Bustos is having a pretty good season. And then when you look at the recruiting, it's pretty wide open, but Georgia's having a pretty good recruiting. This one's too close to call. Excuse me. Georgia, I think, has pretty much locked up the East. I don't see anyone getting in there and getting ahead of them. Coastal Carolina has a pretty good chance of getting in. There's a couple humans in the Sun Belt. Sorry. One of the, of course, you have DWK, who's at Georgia Southern. You have Spoof, I think, who's at Georgia State. Coastal, if I remember correctly, is Shark. Um, and then I think those are the only ones, and I'm probably wrong, but we'll just say that for now. So right now, all roads lead through Troy. But again, you've got Shark, who's really a good coach, who I think will be able to get them on the right track. And then, of course, you have Georgia Southern, who is in pretty good shape. Of course, they play each other. If Georgia Southern wins this, then they jump up to the front of the queue. Georgia State takes on Appalachian State, and then Coastal Carolina takes on Army. That's an out of conference matchup. If we look at the league leaders real quick, no shock here with the passing yards. Let's just click this. The kid from Troy is doing really, really good. Asa Garcia is someone just to keep an eye on. He is one of the better quarterbacks. Burnett out of Alabama. DP likes to throw the ball, so there's a good chance that he's going to be up there near the end of the year. Again, we see Asa Garcia. This is a little bit of shock to me because traditionally the word passing and Skelter don't match. But he's doing pretty good there, at least from a passing touchdown perspective. And then, as you can see, is Jackie Bush is just leading all the passing categories. We talked about Edward Yang and Zachary Grady. LaFleur is someone to keep an eye on if you're thinking about the WWPF, which is our um, Draft Day Sports Pro Football 2024 leagues, as well as Reginald Ashby. There's a lot of teams. This is a run-heavy league. There's not, shockingly, not anyone from Washington State or Maryland because I've been using multiple different types of running backs. So it's not a shock to see Oklahoma State up there or Georgia because they like to run the ball, or Oklahoma. Joe Kish, as we mentioned, and Tony Hamilton are battling it out for the top wide receiver this season. Um, it'll be interesting which one gets there. Receiving touchdowns, Tony Hamilton's just having a really good year. Uh, Not really a big shock though. Tackles, it's not a shock that Syracuse has a lot of tackles. I mean, the record's not all that good. And then sack wise is Cooler is a really good defensive end, and he comes from a very strong coach. You also see Christopher Bailey Stewart is really good at defense. And then interception wise, again, one of Stewart's is up there. So not a big shock there. So no real shock so far. When you look at the top 25, it's kind of how you would expect it to be. So it'll be interesting what happens in the second half of the season. Like people like Maryland, Georgia, UCLA have some pretty tough games coming up. So does Louisiana Monroe. When you look at Iowa, they are, I mean, they got Wisconsin. They're pretty poised to just make it straight to the championship game. Their schedule's not going to be hard the rest of the way. Wisconsin's the biggest roadblock they've got at this point. Oklahoma State, I think, is a little bit different with they have a little bit harder of a schedule coming up, um, where they've got to play Shark, and then of course they got to play Steve. Those are the two big games, but I mean, when you look at a lot of these teams, people like UCLA, uh, I think outside of Skeletor and Bama, they don't really have a hard schedule ahead of them. So they should be able to run the tables. Georgia, of course, I think has a couple harder games coming up. They've got Tom right here, and then of course, well, they really just have Tom. So if they get past Tom, there's a good chance they go undefeated. I think Maryland probably has the hardest schedule ahead of them at this point because they've got to play Michigan, which is stored Ohio State DP, and then they've got to get past Rutgers, which is Kevin. All those teams are having pretty good years. So it'll be interesting to see. Maryland, of course, doesn't normally lose regular season games, but I think that that's going to be very heavily at risk now, only because that's a pretty brutal schedule to end on. And then, of course, Florida State, he's still got Spoof, and then he's got Soa, but Sample has a pretty good chance of making it, um, winning out on the Atlantic. And then, of course, these two teams meet, and then both of these two teams have pretty close selling after that. Uh, if we look at Iowa State, um, I mean, they've got a relatively straightforward schedule. Oklahoma State's going to be the big game. This is going to determine a lot. Texas is a game to watch out for because Texas, even though they're a CPU team, has a habit of knocking off good teams. So Shark will just need to watch out for that. And then, of course, for Skeletor, he's happy I'm no longer at LSU, but really his two big games coming up are against Steve and against Tom. So that'll largely determine a lot of things for him. Um, but he's on a good glide path. So I don't think we're going to see a lot of surprises. I think one of the big surprises is Rutgers, but it's not a big surprise to me because Kevin is a good coach. The other surprise would be Virginia Tech with Bama. He's just done a phenomenal job. It's good to see Florida State is back. Of course, a lot of people have asked me about NC State. Well, Van dropped NC State, and as you can see, NC State is not as good of a team without Van. And then, of course, the big shock to me is Buffalo. Skelto has them well ahead of schedule, and that's a good thing to see. So, hopefully, you like this video. I'll try to do some more of these every maybe like other sim, but have a good night and thank you for your time.